So I can't speak very loud because I'm recovering from a cold. I also just wanted to touch on some key points on the paper, The Continuous Audit of Online Systems. So as Yehuda mentioned, this paper introduces a paradigm shift or an evolution in audit because it presents a concept going from the conventional auditing approach to a more continuous process auditing approach. And this is the first time in the literature that the authors make a connection of auditing with the computer. So in the traditional audit approach and changes in MIS, there were many changes in the 1980s in MIS, and this of course presented many challenges to the auditors. There was a new layer of complexity because of the different physical and logical layout of the data. So as you can see, in the 1950s, the data was stored in magnetic tapes, whereas in the 1970s to the present, the data was being stored in a relational database management system. So why was this change necessary, or why was this approach proposed? So of course, auditors had to adapt to this change in MIS, and they did so by tailoring computer programs to perform traditional audit functions, such as footing and also confirmations. But on the other hand, corporations use real-time systems that process data on a continuous and timely basis. So it is questionable whether the auditing procedures were properly aligned with these changes in MIS. And as Yehuda mentioned, the auditing procedures also entailed verifying account balances and control, but also auditing the system and reconciling different system interfaces. I'm not going to go through this slide completely because Yehuda touched on a lot of these key points. But I did want to mention that this methodology changes the nature of evidence, the timing and types of procedures, and the allocation of effort involved in the audit work. So it is appropriate when implementing this methodology to have the appropriate infrastructure and also for management on the auditors to be on board and have the right motivation. And this is just an illustration of traditional auditing versus continuous process auditing. Here you can see that item B was properly traced to another source document, and this was done annually. Whereas for continuous auditing, we have a programming code and we have thresholds. In this case, the thresholds were not exceeded, and this can be performed as needed or on a daily basis, etc. And this is just a quick overview of the CPA system, which the authors mentioned. And here, the data is stored from key management reports. And that's how the data is extracted and is stored in the database. And then here, the auditor can log on to his or her workstation and then select the audit module they wish to audit. And then they can run reports, analytics, and metrics. But before that happens, the auditor actually has to work jointly with the database designer to decide which audit procedures the system should perform. And then the auditor can run a series of checks or analysis. Now these are just some key concepts that the authors discussed. So in the CPA system, the auditors can view metrics, which are direct measurements of the system. They can also view analytics, which are relationships among metrics with defined thresholds. And if there are any exceptions in either metrics or analytics, then a report will be generated with the alarms that were triggered. Now this is an example of a high-level hierarchy of the billing system. And here there are 6 major billing modules. And if there's discrepancies in any of these modules, a report is generated. And it may not be that clear for you guys to see, but there's 3 alarms, 2 different types of alarms. And from an auditor's perspective, the auditor is going to focus on the type 4 alarm, which happened in the billing module. And here there were 10 accounts that were not billed. So the auditor is going to want to get more detail, and they can do this in the CPA system by looking at a more detailed view of the customer billing module. And here you can see the discrepancy was between the format bill and the print bill module. And the auditor can drill down into this detail before engaging in discussions with management. And the auditor can also see accounts that were lost on a historical basis. Now, those were just some of the functions that the CPA system can perform. But overall, this paper presents a significant, major contribution. It was a new concept that was developed, and it's an innovative way to performing an audit. And in my opinion, this paper presents the greatest contribution because the CPA methodology can be used by internal audit professionals and potentially external audit professionals as well. So this is how the paper manages to close the gap between the literature and the profession. So what I thought was really good about the paper, and as mentioned before, this paper presents an evolution in the auditing profession. It is a paradigm shift moving from the conventional paper-focused audit to a more or less paperless continuous audit. And the paper also provides an example excuse me, of an actual implementation of the CPA system at AT&T Bell Labs, and this is actually very helpful for practitioners. Now, there are some limitations to the paper. Because audit evidence is so crucial to an audit, I do want to see more discussion on how the CPA system, how audit evidence, or what can be used as audit evidence when using the CPA system. I also wanted to see more discussion on the role of management when using the CPA system approach. Are they only going to review serious alerts, or are they also going to perform routine checks of these triggered alarms or these triggered alerts? And finally, I wanted to see more emphasis on the cost and benefits. The paper does mention a couple of times, maybe twice, that there is a cost and there are benefits. But I do want to see more detail or more emphasis that yes, there are high startup costs, but that the long-term benefits are endless once the system is in place. But overall, this was a really good paper. I gained a deeper understanding of continuous auditing, or the continuous auditing methodology. And this paper has been cited many times, so of course it's a good paper. But I don't know if this is the right word. I did find it interesting that the Professor Vasarhelyi and Fern Halper came up with this concept about over 20 years ago, and yet the auditing profession is moving very slowly in terms to adapt into technology.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with you on that. I'm just curious, since you have audit experience too. At least for me, in the past 4 years, most of the clients that I worked on, it seems like this idea of like the paperless audit, in terms of the external auditors having their own systems, doing all like work papers online instead of hard copy. It seems like that push has been made, but I didn't really see a push to integrating into the company's infrastructure to do controls testing or even some sort of analytical procedures. It seemed like even when we did, for example, journal entry testing, we would have our own, what did we call it, the forensics team analyze the data, but we had to get all the data pulls from the company, so there was kind of a two-step process.
Right.
I'm just curious, on the clients you worked on, did you see any like further integration where the auditors were actually integrated into the firm system?
I would say it was pretty similar to what you just mentioned. So they did push for storing work papers online, but not necessarily performing an auditing through the ERP system. And I think the main issue with that was that there is independence, right? It's a very gray area. So I think that's why it hasn't been fully integrated.
Yeah, that seems.
Why don't you, everyone pops in on this question. Actually, that was the question I was going to ask. So that's good. So, what is the answer to this? So there are two issues I think she raised. One is this generic issue of the system that an auditor uses in automation. Should it be part, like CPAS is, or should be something external? I'm sure that what you use is some kind of third-party developed tool, even if it's developed inside the firm. They hire third-party people, etc., and those are not really intermixed with the firm. It's a very, very interesting question. And why aren't they mixed in? I have an answer to that, so let me see what your answer is.
Well, Andrea mentioned the independence, but I also think, and this was kind of in one of the other papers, in terms of just the proprietary rights, and the firm doesn't want to, if they can, unless you set some sort of enforcement, I think most firms don't want auditors having too much access to information. Even when I was on the other perspective of working internally in an accounting department, the rule of thumb was don't give the auditor more than they need. First of all, it might confuse them, information overload, and second, you just don't want to be revealing too much that's not related to the audit. It's nothing to do with any sort of type of fraud, more just trying to keep it focused to the audit itself and not all of these other things going on within the firm. So I don't know if that might be a reason.
Yeah, Uday is dying to say something, so say it.
Well, I was just laughing. She's saying it's too much information overload for the auditors and a way to insult their intelligence. But there's obviously a lot of benefit to the auditing, but the benefits to the company for installing such an audit system may not be as obvious, and the company doesn't want to foot the bill for installing such a system. And then, similar to what Kristen was saying, there's also a security risk. Just with the more people that have access to an information system, the more security risks you're opening yourself up to.
Come on, guys, I want to hear more comments here. That's why you read the paper. You're welcome to make comments too, Charles.
Continue with Huda's comment. I think there's a huge cost for the companies to set up a new system, and from the beginning they have their own system to set up the controls to do everything, and they have their own rules and requirements. So maybe they don't want to change just for the external auditors to have a better way to audit them. So, and they don't want to pay too much costs. Maybe that's why they don't have the urgent need to change everything.
Yes, go ahead.
So once you have the transparency, it's hard to keep it. Like, it's costly. Like, some future is unpredictable. So if something happens, you should keep the transparency. Maybe you lose your goodwill, reputation, everything inside of private sector. And also, but because I'm from public sector, so like they have less motivation to keep the transparency because they don't need to. Like they said the budgeting, like federal government, local government cut the budget, so they cut the employees. No, like enough stuff for doing certain jobs. And we still seeing IMIS is a future of like public administration, especially promote like technology stuff. But actually, I don't see anything. Like, if you guys go to like some, I don't know the department, like income, like you pay the tax, the department of that, it's like take you for hour, like 2 hours to finish your things. So it's like ridiculous. Is that the technology really help the citizens? Like, what they pay the taxpayers, right? Is that really payback? Like, really do something? This might also.
I like this discussion of talking about the public sector in this, because that's some of the things that I have been changing what we do in this year, actually, is that thinking. Can I hear anything else that you guys have ideas here? Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of litigation risk, because I'm thinking that accountants and auditors are conservative. They want to follow the standards and to avoid a potential litigation risk. So the auditing standards is set in this way. And for external auditors, they prefer to follow the steps, and when the litigation happens, they say this is what we did and this is the standard, so we follow the standards. There's nothing wrong with us. But for the continuous auditing, then there's first thing is there's no standards, law standards, standard stuff for the continuous auditing, and people are going to say right now the external auditors, you have more information than previous, so I'm relying more on you. So when the litigation happens, and this still has a long way to go before the practical large-scale implementation of continuous audit.
Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead, speak.
Oh, well, I mean, it takes time to.
Just 1 second, I thought Siobhan had something to say. She's
I
dying
wasn't
to
sure
say,
if you were
but
looking at me.
she's being shy there. Go ahead, say it.
No, I was thinking about litigation risk. The same
You are
thing.
thinking about litigation, yes.
Yeah. I was thinking, what is the next step so that we can like provide the auditors like a protection so that they can say what they want to say, and because I think it's hard to evaluate whether the information system is good or bad. Just look at the amount of information. I mean, continuous auditing can give us more information, but it also make the client or the auditors feel overwhelmed just by too much information, and it may be easy for the managers actually hide themselves, like using too much information so that they can hide the truth. So I think more rules, more like laws should be out to make this process more credible, more useful.
More credible, yes.
So just to continue that, what we need is a kind of a high-tech Enron 2, WorldCom 2, and then it will be followed by a SOX 2.
You know, in a conference, and some regulators were there, and what they said is nothing like a crisis to allow us to create new regulation. This was the guy who was chairman of the IASB now, and they so right.
You can't change these laws. And, the government is always. And you look at government websites, they're always 10 years behind. They're using outdated encryption. If they have encryption, they're using... I was just filling out my tax return, and you need to get a PIN code. And Google warns me that this site is insecure. The government site, to get your PIN code, this site is insecure. And seriously, I have to give them my social security number and everything.
You don't like this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Just to add on to that.
Look,
I think people are lazy. They do not like change. So that's true. They see nature. People are very lazy. They do not like change. They only want to do what they're good at.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need something happen to force them to adapt to the new technology.
Lazy is one word. You probably there is a resistance to change, but also there is a tremendous fear of the unknown. If you change things, at this moment I have a job and I know what to do it. Just imagine if these computers come in with real-time reports. Okay, so it's not necessarily only laziness. There is a resistance. Yeah. You had a comment.
Yeah. I have an interest an auditor in China, I don't know how it works in the US. What I have learned is, as auditors, we prefer working papers also in paper forms. And in accounting department, they also prepare their financial documents also in paper forms. So we are all using like ACL or some systems to audit, and the accounting department use their systems to bookkeeping, but we also still keep the paper forms. So I don't know why we still use paper forms, although we have the systems.
I saw another hand up. Yes, Edward.
I think from the perspective of management, they should protect their privacy, some strategy, business secrecy. So from their perspective, they do not want to audit to know everything. They will just say, you are auditors and you just know what you need. So the balance is dynamic.
Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. If you have any other comments, keep it in your mind. I just want to do something that I wanted to do from the beginning, and I let you discuss a little bit. How many of you have heard about agency theory? Okay. Agency theory has been a very hot topic of research now for a while. And basically it explores the asymmetry of relationship between the stockholders and, who is buzzing? Probably me. Yeah? Yeah, so it doesn't vibrate. The asymmetry of relationship. So this is the principle. The principal is typically the owner of the company. And in a public company, this is the stockholder. Okay? And this is the agent. That's what is called agency theory. And so the agent manages the company, typically management, on behalf of the principal. Now, the first question I ask you is, does the principal know everything he needs to know about the company?
No.
No. Because, of course, if it's one manager and one agent, there is a lot of knowledge there. But these are publicly traded companies, millions of stockholders, and large number of managers and etc. So there is a thing we call information asymmetry. Whereby this guy knows more of this. Now, in order to tell these guys what they need to know, being the owners, what you do is you publish the financial statements, balance sheet and income statement, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Now, before the Great Recession, before the Depression, there was no requirement to audit public companies. So there were a lot of public companies, not a lot of, but there was a good number of them, that actually the numbers were fake. A lot of fraud type of thing. So when the Security Act of 33-34 happened, they said, you need to prove to these guys that your statements are well stated, fairly stated. And so a third party came in, the auditor. And the auditor would examine the financial statements and say that they are fairly stated under GAAP. Can you tell me what GAAP is?
General accepted accounting principles.
Generally accepted accounting principles. Why didn't they say this is fairly stated in accordance to accounting rules? They use the word generally accepted.
Because
Well, go ahead, Edwin.
Because in the report, there are a lot of subjective opinion about the data. It's not strictly about accounting rules. The
Okay,
subjective
let's,
opinion.
you are in the ballpark, but let's kind of, I want accounting students to tell me why they didn't say according to accounting rules.
It's more
Promulgated by the FASB.
because accounting isn't completely rules-based. There's a lot of judgment involved.
Okay, that's one point. First, the FASB didn't exist. Neither did the APB, Accounting Principle Board, that preceded the FASB. But it's more is companies were reported in different ways. But there were some ways that were more common than the other. And then progressively what happened, the APB was created, the APB formulated these rules. But measurement is a reasonably large domain of things. And the rules are coming in pieces. And many of the things that you create in a financial statement still don't have regulation on it. Although now there is a lot of FASB statements, hundreds of them, correct? And so what you couldn't say according to the rules because the rules hasn't been formalized. It had to be according to the rules that are formalized and the way people tend to do this. If someone takes a very diverse, for example, someone would decide that in certain areas of their activity, they measure it totally differently. Like, for example, they do fair value and everything, as opposed to the formulated fair values. That's not forbidden. What you need to do is articulate in your financial statement how you're measuring, and your accountants, your auditors, has to be convinced that that's a good way to do it. And there are companies, for example, that don't consolidate everything, and everyone else does it. If they can convince their auditors that creates a better information for the principles, then you can do it. And there are a lot of big companies like GM, GE, that actually done variations from the norm. So that's why they say general. But the real point here is there has to be a set of rules for the auditor to compare with it. And the second thing is the auditor has to be independent. So he cannot be swayed by other factors beside what they call objectivity. And objectivity is being able to look at the rules and look at what the client did and issue an unbiased opinion. Now, are external auditors unbiased and independent? Let's leave the unbiased. Let's talk about independent.
I probably shouldn't say this because I was an auditor, but I don't think they are.
Why?
Because they're providing a service. They're getting paid by the client.
Exactly, exactly. That's the basic impounding on independence that has to be taught very carefully, is that this party here pays this guy here. If he issues a negative report, conditional report, likely he'll be fired, so you have financial loss. Enron, what happened? Anderson was a very good firm, actually. Anderson, in many people's views, were the best of the big eight. Did you hear about that? So what happened then? Anderson divorced from his consulting arm.
who became Accenture. Accenture, to leave Anderson, had to pay $2 billion to Anderson and leave the name behind. And when that happened, the CEO of Anderson said, well, consulting makes more money than auditing. So they separated from us, let's make some more money and create our own side. And so he became very, very aggressive in procuring clients. And there was one office in Anderson, the office in Texas, in Dallas, I think that was of Houston, I can't remember, Houston, that actually had two very big problems, and one of them was Enron. And at that point, the audit wasn't independent because they were making $25 million $24 million in audit fees and $25 million in consulting. So they figured out that they're making more money in audit. The CEO of Anderson at the time, a guy called Bernardino, basically had his partners go out and look for business. Very aggressive. Before that, Anderson many times refused clients because they didn't think that they could do objective evaluation. Okay, let me make you think a little bit. How can you fix this problem of economic dependence of the auditor from the payer client?
One of the examples given, not for auditing, but for the continuous assurance, was instead of having the auditee or the suree pay, it would be the customers paying.
How would they, what would be the mechanism for that?
It didn't really go into in detail. That was something I was going to
think about it.
Yeah, that was just something that I was thinking about.
Give it a guess. How would you do that?
Well, in terms of, let's see.
I'm thinking you can let the stockholders pay the major part of that, and.
But my question was how?
The government to arrange some auditors to list the company and say.
So some countries actually do that. They assign auditors to engagements, and they can even establish the fee. Square root of billings or whatever, could come up with a fee. Actually, there's a paper by Bob Elliott that he uses the fees that KPMG charged, and he had access because he was a partner and created a formula. Okay, and there is also formula for materiality that can be deferred. The other thing you can do is create a tax. The tax is for every dollar that you get in stock dividends, 1 cent is dedicated to a common pool of auditor, but you don't choose the auditor, it's the government that chooses the auditor, or there is some algorithm. So there are ways to do this. The moment you start suggesting this to business, they say there is too much overhead on this, this is too complicated.
Well, 2 points. Taxing dividends would be, well, companies would start shifting away from dividends if there's an additional tax.
Of course, that's one of the objectives objections that you hear.
And the second thing is, do we really want the government choosing the auditors?
That's another objection.
And then you're going to have auditors paying off the government and corruption. I feel like that would be an even worse solution.
So you can create a lottery.
Well, I mean, the shareholders, in other words, the shareholders would be willing to pay more to have a better auditor, it would seem. So that, if you could somehow get it from the shareholders, but use shares.
But a lottery would almost even work better, because if, let's say, God forbid, the government would have to choose the auditors based on bids, then the firms would just lowball their bids so much just to guarantee the job, and then the quality of the audit would almost go down because you have, your budget is unrealistic for that job. So then you're going to have people working 2-3 times what they normally do and eating their time, and nothing's really reflective. So like your work quality would go down because you have people that are there till 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and you're not
Okay,
really.
let's leave that discussion because I won't have that discussion a bit later in the course. That discussion about lowballing and the discussion about not reporting time, etc. Those are all professional things that are affected in this scenario, but let's not talk about that now. Yes?
So what if the auditors are non-profit organizations? Yeah, not for profit, like this PCAOB, they're not for profit.
Yeah. Do you know how the PCOB is funded?
I think Congress something.
No, but you are not too far. The PCOB was created by Sarbanes-Oxley rule, and basically is a tax on the audit firms. So they take a certain percentage of the income of the audit firms, and that's used to fund the PCOB. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure the forced mechanism is necessary because I think the current litigation system kind of works because you can see most of the litigations, the auditors will be also sued. And when that happens, they will have to pay a lot of money, like a huge money to the investors. So this is kind of a exposed supervisory mechanism that assures that they have to be independent or they have to face this like the huge penalty. So I think this is, the most.
So you think that because of that tax, which is a potential litigation cost,
yeah,
they would be honest?
I think so because
They
the
would
market
be unbiased.
The market should be the most powerful supervisory mechanism.
Yeah, I think the counter argument to that, and by the way, that's a strong argument that's used very often. The counter argument to that is that the person that are being bribed, is not really the traditional bribe. The person that's being economically affected is not the entity that will deal with the bankruptcy. And a large amount of the failures in audit are never detected. And for example, with Anderson and Houston, it was that particular office that had WorldCom, and they had Enron, and a couple of other smaller cases, and many other officers had no problems at all. And that partner there was having his own compensation. Maybe that was his only client. So his motivation scheme had nothing to do with the motivation scheme of the firm, and there is behavior papers that compare motivation of a firm with the motivation of the employee. So your argument is very solid. I'm just saying, I always take the other side of the discussion to be able to, meaning this is what I wish our seminars were, everyone talking, everyone arguing. You know, a seminar with two professors blabbing their mouths and no one else talking is not a seminar. Okay, and when our seminars got to 60 people, I got very upset. That's why I split it up. And even that, our seminars, even AIS, are too big. Yeah.
I think the problem for the Big Four right now is that if they issue, for example, negative opinion, they don't get any reward.
No, they don't not get any reward, they get big punishment.
They get
because there is a large,
punishment.
if you issue a qualified opinion, which is negative, you don't ever issue adverse opinion, but you issue a qualified opinion, depending what the qualification is. If the qualification is, my sister works on the firm, I cannot audit this part of the firm. Okay, kind of exclusion, that's nothing. But if you put an opinion of going concern or something like that, that's very, very big.
So they don't have any motivation to...
They have a penalty.
Yeah, so they do not have any motivation to force them to detect some flaws.
The number of, the large amount of litigation is when the firm goes bankrupt. That's where 60% of litigation comes from. Okay, and the number of firms that quit the auditor after they get qualified is very high. Okay, so there are two penalties there. You guys forgot to say one thing that I want to call your attention. There has been some efforts to remediate this issue, and the efforts have been who pays the auditor the money is not anymore the firm itself, although it finishes up paying, is the audit committee or the board of directors. And the board of directors has something inside called the audit committee. And these days, after Sarbanes-Oxley, the audit committee is fully composed of non-members of the firm. So independent people, people that come from an other location. Okay? And typically these days, compensation committees and audit committees are independent. Okay? Now, one thing that the rules haven't done that they should have done for a long time ago is having the nomination committee be independent. Because to finish up the directors, I call them poodles. Because they do what management wants. Because they get a reasonably good compensation. A large company might get $200,000 a year to be on a board, which has one meeting every quarter and maybe a couple of other meetings if you are in one of these subcommittees. Okay? And so you make a lot of money, you have this thing, and when you get chosen, management doesn't want someone that's very independent. I was kicked out of the board because I was too independent. And, but they didn't kind of dispossess me, they just didn't renominate me. Okay, they called me once for lunch to have a discussion, but as they realized I didn't want to have that discussion, because they were violating Sarbanes-Oxley at that moment. They didn't do anything, but when renomination came, I didn't get renominated. And so actually one of the weaknesses of this is that the nomination committee is not independent. Now, if the nomination committee would be totally independent, there would be other problems with that. Is that God knows what kind of competences and what kind of coherence with management. Very important the boards talk with management. Correct? They're representing the company, they are running the company in theoretical sense. And so typically, in theory, the stakeholders, the principals are represented by the board of directors, and that affects the agents. Now, one more thing I didn't talk about is what is the motivation of a member of management? If you were hired by Enron or by Exxon to be CEO or to be a high management item, why would you go to work for them?
Career development.
No, before anything, what's the first motivation?
Money.
Money, of course. Your salary and your other forms of compensation. Is there any other motivation?
Perks.
Perks, like good-looking secretaries, corner offices, flying first class, and then the third, or doesn't have to be the third, is career development, personal growth, and etc. So you are motivated basically by money and benefits. What is the motivation of the principals?
Money.
Yeah.
They want to make money off their stock. They don't buy stock of a company for any other reason. Okay, you can argue for I buy companies that have green footprints. Okay, and how do they make money? By changing the value of the price and by dividends. Okay, so the moment you increase the salary of an agent, what are you doing?
Taking away from the
Expense.
taking it away from the
You are taking money away from here. So they don't have same objective. And this is called moral hazard. And now these days, believe it or not, this became a big term in many things. A lot of people now talk about moral hazard in many different things. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Bail out of the banks creates moral hazard. Why?
They have no incentive In other words, they don't have to worry about the risks because they know there's a safety net.
That's right. If banks figure out that the big banks like Chase Manhattan, whose book balance sheet value is $3.2 trillion, okay? Is it 3.2 or 2.3? One of those two. Okay, that's still a lot of $1 trillion. Should they be worried that they are going to go bankrupt? Why not?
They're prepared to leave before bankruptcy.
Oh, that's even worse. That adds to the thing. But the first,
You have insurance.
Still, insurance is not going to save a $3 trillion company from going bankrupt.
The government is not going to.
The government will bail out the too big to fail banks.
Yes.
Correct? And when the government went in, what is the company that they bailed out that was the biggest one in the last crisis?
Yeah.
No.
Fannie Mae, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Yeah, you can argue that one, but what was the insurance company?
AIG.
AIG. They put $200 billion behind AIG. They recovered most of it, but at that moment it was a big call. Now, AIG had this part of it that was in England. And why that part of its insurance company that's American was in England? Because the regulations supervising it are much looser in England. And what was this this part of AIG doing? They actually issued mortgage insurance. Okay? So, or paper insurance. So what did it mean? I issue a bond of $100 million. I pay a little percentage to AIG. AIG guarantees that if that bond goes bankrupt, AIG pays it. Very simple concept. And you know, this is good business because companies don't go bankrupt that easy, bonds don't close that easy. Okay? And so for years, it's a very positive cash flow. You have to have a big dip on the economy for bonds to start failing. So they paid about, in 5 years, $3.2 billion in compensation to about 70 people. You like that job, don't you? They paid a lot of money to these people. But when the crisis came, they didn't have the coffers to support it. And then what they actually went to the US authorities and say, can I decrease the reserves I have in my other insurances to pay this? And the states didn't like that idea very much because they wanted insurance in their states to be funded like the rules is. That was one thing. And turns out that the two biggest debtors, the two people that had their bonds guaranteed or they needed as guarantees, the larger ones were BNP Paribas and, you know which one the second? Goldman Sachs. Okay, and Mr. Paulson, who was head of Treasury, where did he work before? Goldman Sachs. One more other question. What happened with the value, his stocks? He had like $900 million in stocks in what they call blind trust. So he's not allowed to maneuver with that money because he's in a, and I'm not implying Paulson was dishonest. I think Paulson is actually one of the best guys. He did a lot of good for us. I read his book, I read Bernanke's book, and I am convinced that Paulson, despite of what Mr. Trump says, Mr. Trump must be sad today, correct? He didn't win Iowa. Okay, despite of what he said and what other people said, I think Paulson, Bernanke, etc., basically saved us from very big problems. Okay, but they didn't know what they were doing; they were guessing, and I think we're very lucky that we had Paulson in that position, because Paulson had been the CEO of Goldman, but before that he had been all kind of financial managerial jobs, and he had this position of a large level CEO that something doesn't work, I don't care, my ego doesn't matter, I try something else. He changed 2 or 3 times what the big fund was going to be used, except until something worked. So I think he did a very good job. But if you think very carefully, the 2 biggest debtors of IAG were very large banks, and one of them with tremendous connectivity to the government. Because not only Paulson, there were 10 top executives in the Fed and et cetera, and people in the board of the Fed, et cetera, they were ex-Goldman people. Goldman has this whole thing about public service, and so Goldman lets their executive leave with reasonably good compensation type of terms to serve the public. In consequence, they have a lot of connectivity with the government. But IAG is a terrible story of too big to fail and moral hazard. Okay, what is moral hazard in this case? If you are very big to fail, you're less worried of going bankrupt, losing all your money, because you know the government will bail you out. Now, in the case of other companies that went bankrupt, the stockholders took a big beating, and they lost most of their money or a good part of their money. And, for example, give me one financial firm that went bankrupt and the executive lost pretty much everything they had.
Lehman Brothers.
Huh?
Lehman Brothers.
Lehman, yes, that's the biggest example, but is there more of those? Does that create moral hazard? No. Those type of companies don't think the government will bail them out. But there's a problem. If many of them go down, everyone else goes down. So, you know, it's not solvable. You know, there is these days a lot of concern with the financial system. We had the worst crisis since the Big Depression, and a lot of concern about the big banks. BlackRock, have you heard about BlackRock? BlackRock is bigger than Chase. And they operate not in a bank regulation environment because they basically manage other people's funds. And so they, although they have a lot of things they do themselves, they are, you know, they are huge. Something like 6 trillion or 7 trillion, I can't remember exactly. And you think if they failed, would hurt a lot of people, correct? But they don't go under the bank regulation. So for example, if they fail, what would happen? It would kind of go into, catapult into businesses that have money invested with them. They'll lose their money, so the businesses will lose their money. There are many of them will lose their money. So I would think that BlackRock is too big to fail. But they are not at the stage where the laws at this moment allow them to be salvaged. On the other hand, if they are ready to fail, what's going to happen? What would happen? Treasury could easily say we don't have the laws that allow us to step in and save them. So it's moral hazard has a lot of implications. I just wanted you to kind of think about this idea of moral hazard. Okay? And of course, there is a moral hazard situation between the principal and the agent. They want different things. There is information asymmetry. Okay? And the manager here will fill up his pockets. Okay? And if hell breaks loose, what does he do?
He leaves.
Quit and go to work for the next bank. Okay, let the company go down. And what is he going to lose there? He could lose his pension and some accumulated compensation that he hasn't pulled up, that hasn't vested. So he doesn't have so much to lose of acquired assets. So there is a moral hazard. Now, The principals can bail anytime they want. You're a stockholder, you can sell the stock, etc. But is that really true? Can you sell all the stock you have in one shot?
No. Always stop.
Yeah, that's exactly what you both said. Is if you're a big, large stockholder, you can't get out that easily. So what do? You sell it slowly, very quietly, so people don't realize that you are bailing out, the big stockholder that is bailing out. So even there is some moral hazard if you start thinking about this. Okay, there is one thing here that I think you forgot. And I thought you were going to say it when you were talking, but you didn't. Is compare internal audit with external. Okay, and you are kind of around that thing. External audit versus internal audit. Can you just tell me what is the issue there? By the way, there's something else that you said that I like that I want to bring out in a second.
Well, I think also.
Go ahead.
The first thing that comes to mind is just the independence issue of relying on internal audits testing.
Okay, so that's one of the things. But the main thing is internal auditors are part of the firm. Okay, they're part of the firm. Theory, they have access to any level of detail. External auditors only need to fairly evaluate fair representation. And you guys mentioned here the discussion of, do you really like to be audited? Does anyone likes to be audited? Even in the government, no one likes to be audited. Okay? So there is an antagonistic relationship between the levels of defense here, talking about 3-level defense, many other ways to qualify this: management, internal audit, and external audit. And these guys examine things on a very high level because in Exxon or in Google, the level of materiality could be $100 million. These guys don't have that level of protection very often. They really audit, there is no materiality threshold. Okay, now I'm going to quote Rod Brennan. Rod Brennan was head of IT audit in Siemens and then chief risk officer. And he is retiring next summer, and he teaches for us the advanced auditing course. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised he'll be spending a lot of time with us working here. And Rod says neither auditors, external or internal, want to find anything. Well, if you're an external auditor and you find a big hole or big fraud that you didn't detect the year before, you have a problem. Even if you didn't have it last year, but you find this here, you're going to lose the client. Very highly likely. How about the internal audit? Why doesn't he want to find big things?
It means more work.
Huh? Yeah, it's
more
very common that auditors get fired. You know, they report to the CFO. Now these days report to the CFO and to the board. So if they find something, the reason why they make them report to the board is that they have an independent chain. Because typically, even if your CFO is not a criminal, it was under him, and he won't look very good that there was a big hole under his purview. Now, what do they want to find? They might want to find little things, because show that they are doing their work. Okay? And the external auditor, I don't think even very little things are very good for them. Because what they do is that they have to argue with the client about making adjustments. Is that correct? Ex-auditors here? Okay, well, so this is terrible. There is no serious behavior motivation to detect fault. So back to my false positive, false negative discussion. This is the population, the universe of frauds or universe, etc. You use an algorithm, these are the positives, these are the negatives. When you fool around with this threshold, what you're doing is either increasing your false negatives or increasing your false positives. Depends your tolerance level. And this is obviously something I cannot prove, but in the domain of materially incorrect, not fairly stated companies, and these would be the ones that had material error, these would have not material error, and in this here we have faulty audits or not faulty audits, audits that didn't find material error. I bet you that there are a large number of companies that had material error, but they were never detected. And this is a very interesting topic of research. Could you develop a methodology that would give a reasonably good feeling that you found false negatives in audits? And I think there is a lot of research to be done at this moment dealing with what I call pseudo-bankruptcies, companies that didn't go bankrupt, but de facto went bankrupt, and all the bankruptcy prediction models tend to ignore them. And pseudo-fraudulent companies, that there was fraud and the fraud was not detected. And what you can do is use secondary kind of measures and see if you say, well, these were the fraudulent companies that the SEC issued comment letters. But there is this whole set of companies that the SEC didn't find a comment letter, but based on ratios or whatever methodology you're using, they might be fraudulent. Interesting line of research. I think I convinced a company a CPA firm to do research on this. Just change a little bit the bankruptcy prediction models, etc., etc. Use other measurements to what you created de facto. Well, what is this de facto or de facto bankrupt companies or pseudo-bankrupt companies that I'm talking about? What happens to these companies that they don't declare bankruptcy?
They get bought out?
Yeah, straight to the first answer. They got bought out. Or they go and get a loan when they couldn't get a big loan, and the terms of the loan is passing over some ownership. Or the other thing they do is they sell off their patents, they sell off their assets. The company never goes bankrupt, but they sell good piece of the company out to pay for the thing. Petrobras, okay, have you heard of the beautiful Brazilian company Petrobras? Was one of the top 50 companies in value in the stock exchange, and now in Brazil they discovered this deep fraud in Petrobras. Basically they were paying 4 to 6% of every contract to the government, to politicians for supporting elections. But I got some money from that money, and would go like 1 for the party, 6 for me. 1 for the party, 6 for me. So actually the money that was in theory given to the parties, although corruptly, actually basically support a lot of politicians. Personal wealth went to Switzerland in some number account. Okay, and the volume is astounding. There was a refinery in Pasadena that was for sale for $60 million. Petrobras bought it and paid $1.2 billion. Was that fraud? You are not totally sure, correct? But what is the likelihood? And how does the compensation go? The people that sold the refinery pay off a lot of okay? Because that money is not in Brazil, it's not in the Brazilian books, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, Brazilian government now discovering, there is a very interesting phenomenon happening in Brazil. I grew up in Brazil, so I'm very interested in Brazil. There is a judge in Paraná, south of Brazil, that created this operation Lava Jato. And basically they found the problem Petrobras. And from the problem Petrobras, they indicted chief treasurer of the governing party and went on indicting people. And now there are hundreds of politicians under indictment. Several of them already are in jail. And then they discovered, and there is a thing in Brazil called delação premiada. It exists here, but it's not called that way. It's basically, if you spill the beans, you get a lesser sentence. Okay? So there are a couple of these top executives that have made accords of delação premiada and are basically giving detail by detail of someone carrying a briefcase with $500,000 several times into an office because the $3 million they needed to pay didn't fit on the briefcase. Okay, now literally, I'm not making this up. And at this moment, the big scandal is that the Brazilian ex-president who left the presidency and re-elected his right-hand person, they found 2 apartments that he bought that were in his name, that he bought, that actually had been refurbished at the tune of $1 million by an engineering firm that was getting contracts from Petrobras. And so this first time that the ex-president is being involved in this. And the chairman of Petrobras, during the time that this was happening, is the current president of Brazil, but she hasn't been indicted on anything. There hasn't been even any news leaks that she is being involved. She was chairman of the board. She was all the way in the top, and those are political dominations. But it's very interesting story about very deep kind. Who was the auditor of Petrobras? PwC. And when this exploded, PwC held back their opinion and made Petrobras restate. And the stock of Petrobras that sold at $70 is selling at $2.50. Are they going to go bankrupt? Unlikely, because it's Brazilian government owned. And Brazilian government controls a lot what happened with Petrobras. But the other thing that's happening with all oil companies, that the oil, instead of selling at $120 a barrel, is selling at $26. And so many of these oil companies are going to have a lot of problems. So Petrobras is selling goods in mass. Okay, they had a list in the newspaper yesterday. I was in Brazil the day before yesterday, and their goods of selling all their windmill energy generators. They have these offshore reserves, and these reserves, they call it under salt, because under the layer of the salt, deep in the water, and costs about $100 a barrel to extract it. And they have started exploration of these things. And the reserves, they claim they are nearly as big as Saudi Arabia's. So they're big reserves. There's a lot of energy out there that people thought we are going to run out of oil. Doesn't seem so, at least not in your lifetimes. But they're going to stop that. And so this is de facto bankruptcy happening, isn't it? Yes or no? They stopped all the investment plans. They are selling assets. Are they going to go bankrupt? Probably not. Chapter 11. And government is going to go in and short some of their loans. Maybe the government will set up the distribution prices on the pumps reasonably high to increase their profit and their resources. They have to do something. But there are a lot of situations like this that is not only government, but companies go there and sell their assets. GE's sold their financial branch, was 40% of their, they were not going bankrupt. That's not a pseudo bankruptcy. So what kind of algorithm do you use to separate the companies that you should consider bankrupt, but they are not bankrupt? Can you think about something to do?
Look.
The asset is.
That's why I look at the major reduction on assets. Okay, it looks at the level of debts that they have, make a projection before the reduction of asset of what would be the outcome. I mean, what is the prediction of income over time, etc., etc., and you can create this company. I bet you the numbers at the end, although this is a total stochastic type of thing, are going to, the prediction of bankruptcy is going to be better than before. Interesting research. I was looking at this paper on data mining based on fraud in companies, letters of the SEC. And so the comments of the SEC forced companies to restate, and some of them were fraudulent restatements. Okay, UE is doing actually a text mining study on comment letters. Okay, now those were just the tip of the iceberg. Same kind of thing as failing companies is companies that issued fraudulent financial statement, or companies that were defrauded. And that's a little bit more difficult than prediction.